I want to keep my design consistent with what I have here. We don't want to make this look too deep. That would be a very easy mistake to make. And I'm showing that this area is stepping down. And it's in shadow, whereas this area here is in light. This little bit here is actually, it's not part of this bar, it's actually behind. So I want to show that with my overlaps, at least as sort of a note for myself. And I have to be really careful in how I show this lip in this surface, because again, I don't want to make it appear too deep. The smart thing would be to sneak up on this area and not to try to go too direct too quickly. Because it's not one consistent plane break. There's sort of a difference in how these forms are turning away from us, and in the case of what I'm drawing right now, how they are dropping into shadow. I'm going to put a cast shadow that's being cast from this part of this thick bar over. Or at least I'm going to try to make that appear as if it's a shadow being cast. And one cast shadow by itself rarely does the job. You'll need another one, so you'll need to see a certain level of consistency for you to start reading the lighting. It usually means more than one cast shadow that are agreeing. And the Coracoid process on this side is not actually touching the side of the box. Keep that in mind. And this is sort of like, I want to emphasize the flatness here, but here's where I want to put another cast shadow, because I want you to read this area here as representing the area that is covered in cast shadow. Just like this is. So I'm trying to create a visual consistency to some degree, and obviously in here as well. So that you can begin to see this as real forms and not just lines. As pretty or as well designed or as graceful as the lines might be, if they don't really appear to represent a clear readable form that we can come back to, then it's not going to be adequate for the purposes of what we need. If you've ever drawn carefully or wanted to draw more carefully, or wanted to draw more three-dimensionally, this is the perfect time to learn how to do it. And those opportunities are rare. And valuable, and we want to take advantage of them. Okay, so this is going to be a cast shadow too. Here. It makes sense. I got to be careful too. I got a little too wet there and I moved my hand over it. The back, more of the rear part that is visible. This can need to be even darker. I can only go so dark so quickly here because if the ink pools up, it's going to create unintentional accents. This should be coming all the way up to make contact with the top of the box here. It's just not happening. It's not happening in the front. It's happening a little bit further back, which is why before it looks like I drew it too short, but I never make a mistake. No, I'm kidding. It looks like I drew it too short, but if that's really the front little section, the higher point is back here. So it's actually, it's like two overlapping forms. And now I've just clarified that a little bit. And we are making contact here. Here is the superior angle, which is further back. And it might be good to somehow indicate that. This is not the nearest portion. This is back in space. There's different ways we can do that. But let's put a little bit more dark ink on this one, or begin, because I haven't done that yet. And so I'm thinking, where do I want to get a darker dark? Where do I want to separate more? Ooh, that's a lot of ink coming out. And that happens sometimes, so I just gotta. Sometimes it's because there's a little more water on the page than you thought. Or it could be because the shape of the quill pen has changed as we use it. It's wearing down. In this case, I think what's happening is just a little bit too much moisture on the page, so these darks are going in pretty dark. So I just got to be careful and maybe focus a little more on the dry areas. I want to sort of carve out the shadow a little more in an attempt to, because I want to show that it's actually thinner and sharper here. Thinner and sharper. And that it's going to get quite dark in here, I think. I mean, not only is this area so obscured that we're not really going to that we're not going to get much use out of modeling it from this angle, that I think the best way to deal with it is to sort of just push it back And so that's why I'm choosing to sort of put tone in there. I think what might be useful at this stage would be to kind of go over the outline. I was sort of avoiding it because the ink was sort of acting unpredictably. So this is really where the coracoid is ending. Okay, we got to get a little more. Gonna have to get a little more specific with this form. It's also such a beautiful form. As a designer, I want to do it justice. It's not always because it's necessarily the most functional part. You're going to come across the situations where you're studying something for a purpose, but then along the way, you find appreciation for the beauty of nature. It will help you remember. Just looking at both of these at once, I'm just wondering, oh my goodness. If you sop it up early enough, it the damage is less. I'm just looking to see maybe where I could just make things a little clearer. Maybe carry a little more shadow up here. switch to my lighter ink. Strengthen the shape, because the shape obviously is quite important. Even if it's at an awkward angle, we do want to know where this is. Maybe a little more in the glenoid fossa. Don't want to blow it here, but because I would like to sort of show that it's not an even ridge across the whole thing. Like, there are areas, just like with the glabella, as we'll learn later, there are areas that sort of have like a ramp in, like a lead in. And it's actually, this lip is actually thinner here. And so obviously that's not the primary concern. There's a step down here. Maybe it can be best described like that. And even a few areas of tone. Just showing that we're stepping back. And this area, which is, it's not in cast shadow, but still it is sort of stepping away, turning away from the light. So maybe dropping it into more tone. I think we need a little bit more, just need a little bit more body there. So let me just clarify this outline. So it's getting a little bit wet in here, but I think that we would be seeing in the shadow side, at least, we should be getting more of a weighted line. And that weighted line can just imply that there is like a sharp plane that turns away. It can imply or emphasize an overlap. It can separate, in this case, separating one area from another. In this case, selling that move. In this case, showing that the plane turns away. And then sometimes it's just about putting a little more tone. Trying to be careful not to. If I would have moved into that outline, it probably would have created a distracting note. So I'm going to let this dry and take a coffee break and come back. See if there's any little tweaks I can do to sort of make these forms a little bit clearer at this stage. And if not, the next stage is going to be to trace and transfer these angles over to the next step. One thing I noticed in the drawing here is that this is actually the coracoid process, peaking from the far side. It's something like this, if you can see. But while I was doing the line work, I sort of lost track of that. And so it looks like it's just like some kind of knot or nub on the acromion. This can be fixed. It sort of begs the question, how should that acromion be depicted? To make it a little bit clear that this is not the same form. It's sort of in a darker tone, but maybe just a little more tone there might help. The next step of the process is going to be to carry over via a parallel transformation in the parlance of the old masters. We're going to carry over the scapula to get a anterior view, a frontal view, a costal view. Those are all the names for this view of the scapula. As we know, the scapula has a convex side and a concave side. So this is the concave side. It's going to be really important when we start drawing that is clear, that this is curving this way, and then this is curving this way. That's going to be important. But first, we need to get the scapula moved over. So there are some advantages to working orthographically. One of the big advantages is that because there is no perspective distortion, because things that are nearer to us do not appear larger in orthographic view. So the advantage of that is that we actually have the same outlines here as we're going to need here. What we're going to do next is actually use tracing paper, and I'm going to blot this a little bit because I don't want this to be wet when we put the tracing paper over it. We're going to lay down some tracing paper. It doesn't have to be tracing paper, of course. It can be any paper you can see through. My paper is rather large, so I had to get a somewhat larger tracing paper brand. This is just whatever I could find online. It doesn't really matter the specifics. These are 19 inches by 24 inches. So I'm going to take a sheet of this out. I'm going to place the pad on the ground and hope that my Akita doesn't walk over it and ruin it. Probably in vain. I'm just going to tape down the top. If you've worked with tracing paper before, you probably know that you don't want to tape down the whole page. You don't want to tape it down on the bottom necessarily because you want to be able to pull up the tracing paper and see the difference because these layers are blended sort of like in Photoshop. It's weird that we make analogies to digital so that you can understand something traditional, but I think a lot of people have more experience with the digital. If I just have the tape on the top, then I can lift it up to make sure I know what we're seeing. So we've been using so far for the graphite portion, we've been using a hard graphite. Graphite it's a form of carbon. It's an organization of carbon, and it is naturally occurring. It can be created artificially as well. Not the graphite used for pencils is not done that way. The old masters would not have been using it early on because the graphite mine that was created in England was initially used for military purposes, only later was used for art. But it's a fantastic medium. This graphite, I mean, if you could do the beginners course that we have, you'll get more information about graphite. The hard graphite, what it really means is that there's a mixture of clay. So it's not pure graphite. Pure graphite would be very, very soft. So I've been using a harder graphite, which means there's a higher mixture of clay so far because I want the lines to be light so that not only are they easy to erase, but so that when we put the pen over it, those lines to some degree disappear. Now, since these are illustrations, even outside of this course, I have plans for these illustrations. I wanted to get a relatively clean result. That hard graphite is not going to probably be enough for this next stage. So I'm going to use the other side here. And this other side is much softer. And so what you'll see is when I place it down, you're going to see that the line is much clearer, which for you, being able to see it is going to be easier to see. And we'll see, I did a test. This is also pretty erasable. So I might use this for the rest of the lay-in, perhaps, just so that it's easier for you to see what I'm doing. That's going to be sort of required in order to transfer over. even though we're not just going to flip both of these over this way, because what that would do is that would put, this is our lateral view. It would put the medial view right here. And I actually want the frontal view, the anterior view, the causal view to be here. So we're going to trace both of these, but we're not going to flip the whole thing. We're going to place them individually once we do that. For starters, I'm going to trace this side. I'm using my softer graphite for this. Tracing doesn't have to be a mindless activity. You can sort of clean up the shapes and character of your lines. But one thing in particular I want to draw your attention to, which is that, I'll just diagram that here. So if you have a frontal view and you have an overlap that is doing something like this, let's say, so this is form A and this is form B, and form B is behind. Well, if we do this mirroring that I'm talking about and we transfer it, it's been flipped over, this is not the orientation of the overlap anymore. So this is not going to be correct. What's going to happen is this form B is now going to be the one overlapping the form A. It's really interesting, and that might seem nitpicky, or maybe it seems obvious. That is something we need to pay attention to. So as I'm doing the tracing here, I don't want to copy the overlaps. So I might leave little gaps where an overlap might happen, or I might just keep it in mind that the overlap should not be directly traced, because those overlaps are going to be, the overlaps are going to be reversed. And that is misleadingly simple. As we continue to do these kinds of studies, we're going to come to understand that all overlaps, all outlines, all contours, everything have a relationship to form. And they're not arbitrary. It's not just two lines crossing each other. They represent something three-dimensional. So the coracoid process is going to be, in this case, when we flip it, it's going to be the positive form. But I can help myself a little bit maybe by just making that change a little clearer so I don't get confused on the other side. I don't know what your level is. I don't know what your experience is. But at least to me, when I first learned about that, when I did these kinds of studies, it was not obvious or intuitive necessarily how these ideas relate to the three-dimensional world. And if you've ever done character design, concept work, or you've ever had to work from somebody else's model sheet where they have a character that they've sort of flipped, you might know that it's very easy to make a mistake in the translation from one view to the next because it's not natural for us to think that way. We have to train ourselves to think analytically, orthographically, and to understand form at a higher level. So now you can see I've got the outlines of the dorsal view. We could also bring over some of these points. Like I could bring over the spine of the scapula just so I know where it is when I place it down. But I think in this case, we have enough information. So let's leave it like that. Let's just go ahead and move on and let's get this lateral view as well. And I'm trying to be thoughtful. You can make a mistake here, or I can actually pick up on a mistake that was already made. So I'm always trying to be present. It's very easy to like tune out. Just mindlessly sort of copy or do the lines. When you make a drawing, when you make an art, you don't have a quality assurance team, probably. You don't. It's just you. And so, how do we avoid making big mistakes in our work? Well, it is unavoidable, but what will help is just being present. That's really helpful. And obviously the superior angle is going to be in front on this mirrored view, as we will see. And if possible, I try to sort of simplify the lines somewhat, simplify the curves, or maybe just state them a little more clearly, like a slight level of cleanup. And we will benefit from that cleanup. Our work will, as you'll see. So this is an opportunity to make our work better. It's not purely a mechanical requirement. It's primarily a mechanical requirement, but there's always opportunity to improve. Okay, so we've got these. Now I'll take the tape off that I have, and I'm just using like white artist's tape. It's not a particular brand, just whatever I could find. The idea is that supposedly it'll come off without damaging the paper. What we need to do now is we need to get these outlines drawn on the rear side because we're flipping it. We're not just transferring it. If we were just transferring it, if we were just making a copy of this, then all we have to do is coat the back with material, trace over the lines again, and that would, like a carbon copy, that would copy it. But we actually need to flip it around. So what I don't want to do is accidentally put lines down on my good sheet. So I'm just going to grab a sheet that I have around. This is just a piece of 16F animation paper, and this is just to protect. It's to protect my main sheet. So I don't need to tape it down now because there's no way for me to, there's no registration that I have to worry about. And what I'm going to do, I'm also going to use the soft graphite here. And so here, I don't really have the original drawing there. Just the design of the lines. If you're going to do any cleaning up at this stage, any simplification or tuning of the curves, it's got to be purely linear, abstract, because you don't have the reference there. Almost caricaturing the lines a little bit. And it depends on the look you want the final drawing to have, of course. Maybe you want all of the undulations and nuances. Maybe that's more important for the look. But I just want to draw your attention to the fact that this is also an opportunity to fine-tune the design. The kinds of things you could be doing is showing the differences, accentuating the differences between the curves and the straighter areas, the round forms and the sharp forms. Those are things you can make more obvious. If you want the audience to think of something as boxy, you can enforce the straightness of the area and of the angles. We want to be as descriptive as possible, but there's no one style. And so you notice a little bit of lines are coming down here. That's what I'm trying to avoid. That's what I'm trying to avoid doing on my other side because there are lines underneath these lines. So it stands to reason that you're going to get a transfer. I always think of a section of a cylinder there or an ellipse. Also, another thing about lines, the line work, is you want to have variety. What I mean is we tend to have a certain linear sort of vocabulary that we use and reuse. If you notice that it's like the same kind of curve you're using again and again, like let's say you're just using a bunch of C curves. This is one thing I see all the time with students. They do the whole drawing with essentially one curve. They don't have different types of curves that they're doing. They don't have a curve that's hooked and then straight. They don't have a curve that is curvy and then flattens out. They just have like one curve that they use again and again. So in a lot of my critiques, and you can see these in my classes, but in a lot of my critiques, you can hear me give that advice to students, which is work on the vocabulary of your curves. Well, you can do that here too. From a design standpoint, trying to get more of a variety of types of lines. It will feel more natural if you do that, because nature is not just giving us the same shapes and curves. There's a much bigger variety in nature than we're going to have as artists. Leonardo had this theory of moto, is what he referred to it as, but it's this essence of movement. And he didn't ever get a chance to finish this theory or illustrate it. His school or his students or his followers probably took it further, like in the Codex Huijins. His idea of movement was that essentially there is an infinite continuum of positions that the body can be in and any one joint can be in. Whether or not this is true, I'll just articulate it, because obviously it's theories for quantum gravity. There's not truly a continuum, that there are quanta, space is quantized, but let's just stick with them for a minute. The idea was that there was an infinite amount of iterations, positions that a joint can take. So his example was, if you were to draw a circle on a wall, that circle is complete, and that circle represents an infinite amount of points. And since your shoulder joint made the movement, then it stands to reason that your joints are infinite. Also, there's an infinite amount of aspects. There's an infinite number of views you can view the body at. And because of that, those infinities, the idea that we're just going to copy the same model, template, position again and again is a disservice to nature. And in reality, what we should be doing is we should be coming up with some kind of theory or some kind of practice that does nature more justice. So I've got the backside of that. I mean, I don't really have time to get into that here that much right now, but this is what we want now. Like, now we are getting the result we need. Now, one thing you could do, I didn't do this here, but you could do this, and it's probably a good idea for you to do it, is put some of these lines in as well to help you register it. It'll make sure that you're not tilting it. Just noticing that I ended up dropping down the bottom of the glenoid with a form that's visible on the other side. And I'm wondering if I might have dropped it a bit too low here. So that's something that I want to check. It's possible that I don't want that modification. I think what it was it was a bit of a design change midway. So once we had this line representing the bottom of the glenoid, that bottom was fine here, but then somewhere along the way I decided to add a little more of a ridge. So the question is whether we're gonna add more of that ridge here and then do it here and here as well, or whether or not I just want to bring that back up. But that's just something I'm just gonna make a note of for now. That is the nature of that's the nature of this process. The nature of this process is that we are correcting and fine-tuning our ideas based on the different views, so that each different view gives us information. And I'm going to use the soft side now, and I'm just going to put material along where using the side of the graphite along where this line is going to be, because when we press down on it from the other side, it's going to leave hopefully a subtle but visible line that's been transferred. And of course, we don't want to get too dark. We don't want it to be too messy, because this is our real sheet here. I can do it here too, just in anticipation for the next step. I'm doing two things at once. I'm tuning the pencil, tuning the lead, which of course is an expression. It's not actually lead. Graphite was originally thought to be a form of lead. Lead was used by the ancients. I want to be careful not to smudge the page down too early. And so with the dark outline, it might be a little harder to line this up, but it's fine. We can do it. I believe in us. It's going to be something like and the best we're going to do, I mentioned this before, but the best we're ever going to get is within a reasonable tolerance of error. Of course, these are natural forms we're drawing. There's an enormous amount of variety in nature. And it's never going to matter that our scapula, for artistic purposes, it's never going to matter that our scapula is a millimeter this way or a millimeter that way. So we want to do the best job we can, but that natural error, the human error, the error of the tolerances, just the fact that we're designing it, like we're changing it as we go, all of that is part of the process. I'm going to transfer these lines down, but I'm going to use the harder graphite because it's actually stiffer. I could also use, rather than using a line at all, I could use a metal stylus, like a metal point stylus, and maybe I can do that because it's very hard, very rigid. And first I want to do a little test. So I'm just going to pick one area, draw a little bit of a line, and then see that, yep, it is coming down. Now we are getting some smudging, so we are going to have to clean it up with a kneaded eraser. We want to minimize it, but it's going to happen. So I'm going to almost incise this. I'm just pushing down, and I'm being careful here. Because whatever we did with the design of this line, this is where it matters, because this is where it goes down. And because of the margin of error, maybe the areas that actually touch down on the page, I can sort of leave open, just in case they need to come down a little bit. Hopefully you can see that. And if you forget which lines have gone down, that's why it's good to just tape it on the top so you can lift it up and check, oh yeah, we're here. Now, if I had used a harder graphite on the smearing on the backside, if I'd used the other graphite stick rather than the soft one, I'd have less of a mess, but it would be harder for you to see. And because you seeing is the whole point, I want to make sure that I don't block you out. That's often the challenge with recording art instruction, in that what is convenient for the artist to make a good drawing, painting, give a good performance is often at odds with what is good for on camera. I've got these lines transferred. Now my chromium is not coming up as high as it should here. That's going to need to be corrected. Where's my coracoid? Most of this stuff appears to be in the right place, but I am going to need to come up here. Looks like we're in a good position there. And as for now, I've kept this sort of level, but it might make sense to sort of lift this. I mean, get back closer to where it was. We might want to make that change and cut some of this off. So basically, sort of undo what I've done here, or we can leave it. This is sort of my original set of measurements and designs I prepared, and I think I just was looking at this particular scapula. I have access to it at the moment, and this one was just a bit fuller. So I think to keep everything consistent, we might want to keep it closer to where my original design was. So this, maybe we're just going to ignore this little section. That might make our lives a little easier. And then also maybe coming in more here. But we have that transferred. And so now let's transfer the other view. A mistake is totally fixable, but it's a little bit of a pain when the more work goes into the sheet. So you can deal with any mistake that might occur. I've also grown the glenoid out from my original design, and that is reflected right here. But that is actually okay. So I made the glenoid fossa a bit wider from my original design as I was doing this, and then that's reflected here. But I think that's okay. And we might even, I mean, I can always erase this line and this line and grow this out. But I think in this case, we're going to go back to the original design, chopping this off. And then in this case, we're going to allow this to be a little wider than what I originally had planned. Okay, let's transfer this. If you don't know, this is a silver point style. Silver point stylus. You can, there are, they sell styluses specifically for transferring. So this is normally a tool that I use for silver point drawing. And without a prepared surface, without a prepared ground, any kind of metal point tool, which is literally just the metals. Silver point is silver, typically sterling silver. Pure silver is too soft. But they don't make marks on the page. Leonardo da Vinci used to do his underdrawing with a stylus, a metal point stylus, without a prepared ground. So it didn't make any marks. It would just, in size, it would cut the paper. And so if you had a raking light, if you had light coming from the side, or depending on the angle, you wouldn't see those lines unless you had those lighting conditions. So it was his underdrawing, essentially, his sketch layer, as you would say today. So his sketch layer was just depressions on the page. Now that's going to depend on you having a certain kind of a paper that is strong enough and thick enough. And they would have been working on linen rag, which is not produced today for the most part. There is Linton rag, but the quality of paper that was produced during the Renaissance is no longer produced. There are just a couple companies that do something, a high quality product, but it's not the same thing. So their paper was much tougher and much thicker, and obviously, as we know, lasts a very long time. Whereas today, almost all papers, unless they say otherwise, are wood pulp, which was a process that was developed in the 19th century. Okay, just want to get this curve here now. And don't throw away your tracing paper sheets because you never know when you're going to need them again. Sometimes, I mean, you might need them because a future assignment, I tell you, hey, we're going to use that again. That is one possibility. But the other thing is just you might have to start over or you might have to redo it. It's not smart to damage this or throw this away. So I'm going to throw it on the floor. So I want to clean this up just a little bit. I'm just going to use a kneaded eraser. I'm going to make sure it's not too dirty to begin with. And while I'm at it, this is what's so wonderful about graphite, by the way, is that it erases so nicely. This is a thick paper, like a watercolor paper. So I don't want to get rid of maybe within the borders, just within the borders of the drawing. I want to clean it up a little bit while I'm at it. I can do the same here. A kneaded eraser is rather gentle. And this paper is so tough, I could actually scrub down rather hard. If you were to use like a white plastic eraser, that would be like one step harder. I'm not going to touch that area that I drew on earlier because who knows, maybe it's still a little bit moist, and then you can smear. So again, the two changes, just to point them out again, is I dropped this lower than my original design as I was drawing, and that came through in the transfer, but we are going to just sort of cut this off here. And in this case, I made this a little wider than my original design, but I think in that case, we're going to keep it. Okay, so I want to leave the original line, but maybe what I'm really trying to clean up is a little bit of this, like the scattered graphite particles. Just to get a little bit of a cleaner result. Sometimes when the paper starts to look messy, we get sloppier just without even realizing it. It's good to pay special attention to the cleanliness of our work. It just sort of keeps us in that sort of disciplined mindset. I don't want to smear the graphite here as I work on this costal view. One thing I could do is I could just have a piece of paper that I place here. I can just even fold this so that it's not too. I could do something like this and just cover this work so I don't accidentally smear it too much. The other thing I could do is we could illustrate this first, ink it, let that dry so that the smearing is no longer an issue. But I think probably this will be fine. I can even place just a piece of tape up here just to hold it in place so I don't have to worry about it. Put a piece of tape on the other side too. Just so this is a little bit of like a guard for now. And then what I think we're going to do is work with the, I think we're going to work with the softer graphite, just assuming it's going to be erasable and it's going to erase away. If this is bothering you, like you're like, oh no, there's these ink lines, what are we going to do? We can run lines around the outside of our form later. That's something that you recognize from a lot of the old master drawings. That is to create a tone, is to create an atmosphere, is to create a background, but it's also to allow you to change the outer contour. That's one of the things it lets you do. So once we've got everything in place, we can come in and decorate. We can decorate this. So this kind of thing, that kind of thing, they're going to happen. I mean, we can pretend they didn't happen. We can just accept every mistake. We can just hope nobody notices, but that's not the goal here. The goal is to come up with a design that we can literally take into 3 dimensions. And that is what we are going to be doing. So with that in mind, we just want to get the drawing right and not worry so much about, how pretty it looks at this stage. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to reinterpret the outline from here to here and get an idea of what these forms really are. So like obviously here, this is the coracoid process here. And that's quite interesting that we have that this is the coracoid process and this is the acromion, and it's reversed, whereas this is the acromion and that little peeking out part is the coracoid process. Just like before, our initial goal with this, before we do the ink, is just to get the structures and angles and proportions as correct as we can, relatively simply. I know this outline is a bit nuanced because it's been copied from the final, transferred from this final. So that might throw us off a little bit, but we do want to be relatively simple in how we deal with these forms here. I'm going to take a coffee break, and when we come back, we are going to draw with graphite the inside of the scapula, this surface, the costal surface, the surface that slides over the ribs, the concave side. We're going to go ahead and ink that right away so that we've got that finalized, and then we're going to move on here and do the medial view in graphite, and then we'll do the medial view in ink. I'll take a break and I'll see you in a moment. This is the correct view for me, whereas for you that's too tilted. That's the correct view from you. So you'll see me switching between them so that I can reference it as well as do the marks. And there's this flat area of it here. It's the coracoid process that is making up this sort of peeking out portion of the outline there. And it's sneaking up, and it has a zenith here, or an apex, and then it comes down this way. And then what's really happening is there's this curve that makes its way down from about here to here. That's really what, although it might not be, depending on where the light's hitting, that might not be very obvious. All of this is the glenoid. I'm going to have this sort of curved more this way. And if you're wondering, let's say, for example, we do something that changes the outline here. Do we need to then go to our original and update it? That's a case-by-case basis. It depends. If we discover like an error or a big change we need to make, yeah, it is possible that we want to I'm going to take this in more. it is possible that we want to go in and make the change on both sides. So that's why we have to be focusing. We have to be analytical. I know it's bending and it's changing an angle here, but this is the top, and then this represents the down planes and the side planes and how those sort of stretch down. This is going to be rounder if it's receiving a bigger humeral head, a larger joint. The humerus goes here. This is going to be rounder, so it's going to be rounder on bigger skeletons. The scapula that we're doing is a little more average, a little more subtle, but on a larger skeleton, this is a rather heavy scapula. I'm using this sort of heavier one. This is from a male. I'm using this heavier one because it makes it easier for us to see these little nuances in smaller, slighter skeletons. All this stuff is more subtle, so it's useful to look at a big heavy one. But how round that is going to depend sort of on the scale and some of these other things. We talked about how that bar slips back. Well, there's almost like a trough that is created here, which we're probably going to get into more in the ink. But this is all stepping back, and then this is where it really starts to turn this corner and become concave. It's just getting narrower. This is that sort of bar that is stepping back. It's this stuff right here, which doesn't look like much from this angle, but here we're seeing it's rather wide. That sort of formation terminates. It's not going to be that clear in the actual rendering. And then what we have here is there's this concave area, and then you can see it on camera pretty clearly. Because the superior angle is diving anteriorly, it's going forward. It's like folding, sort of like a hat with a mitten, and it's folded over. Do you see that? And so that folding is very characteristic. It's important. In terms of how we represent it, it could be as simple as just doing something like this. Because remember, this is the line where we're going to go in and resolve this more with the pen and ink. I always find this really interesting. This reminds me of like a roller coaster track. So they're going, whoa, and then they're dropping down. Maybe there's water down here and there's a big splash. That's how I sort of see this area, because it really is like a little road or like a little track. For these more precise areas, maybe the H is a little bit better. And then we've got the spine of the scapula, which we're seeing the other side of it. It's interesting because, and I'm not sure that's not going to be easy to show, but what we're actually seeing the top sort of the topmost plane of it. It's just angled towards us. So we're not seeing, like if it was a box, we're not seeing the front. We're sort of seeing, it's like a slope going this way. And so I want to put a line here because that's so important and it's so non-intuitive. I'm going to put a line here, like a cross contour, to show that. So that this is what it's really doing is we're seeing the top and then it's folding up. So it's like twisting like a ribbon. let's keep that in mind, because if you don't have that in mind, it's going to be, this looks as if it's like the underside. It looks like you're seeing the underside here in the profile. That's what you would assume, but we're really, because it's twisting, we're really seeing the more top facing plane, but it's spiraling. I don't want to diagram here. Maybe I can diagram over here. What I mean is that spiraling up, there's this spiraling up, and then it's also opening out, opening up, it's opening up. So it's really something like this. And so when we do the line work, that's something we're going to want to show. Okay, what else do we need for this stage? Well, we talked about how these ridges are caused by the intermuscular septi or septi. They're sort of within the body of the muscle. They're not key for us because this is all subscapularis. And we're not going to need to tease this out. But it's good practice for form for us to indicate them. Obviously, the slighter the muscle, the slighter the muscle of the person, the less this is going to be obvious. So on some people, on some scapula, you don't even really see these, or you can't make them out. Also, it reminds me of a leaf, a plant. So for the first time here, we're actually seeing the medial corner or the medial face. We know that this is a joint. This is where the scapula joins the clavicle. So the articulation with the clavicle, it's not here. It's not here. It is here. It's here. And that's not really intuitive. You'd expect it to connect somewhere down here, but it's actually connecting along here. So this tends to be right here, a flattened area. And it is variable because it depends on how the articular surface is formed. It depends on a variety of things. But what we can do is try to distinguish the rounder part where this is still rough, knobby surface grabbing onto muscle. Try to show this sort of articular facet. It's very subtle. It's going to be hard for that to come through in the rendering, I'm sure. But that's just sort of a note for ourselves. Another thing I changed is I made the superior angle a little beefier. I think in my original design it was cut down a little bit more. How round is this? Because on a slighter person, it's going to be more concave. So this concavity meets this fullness, this roundness. No matter what, it is going to have some degree of roundness. So I want to, and what it really happens is this sort of a thing. So I want to just sort of put some guidelines there that are going to show, sort of get us in the ballpark. And then we should be seeing, this is, as you can see here, this is sort of an exposed plane. So we want to make sure that you can see that plane break. And then probably from this angle, we're going to be seeing a little bit of the medial plane poking out. You'll notice that the reason these bumps exist is it's the termination of this growth pattern here. Do you see that? So they correspond. So the actual bumps correspond with those growth patterns. You can think of them as like the natural extension of that shape. And also what happens up here is that there's like a rim. Almost like in the brow. There's like sort of this attaching. This does look a little more organic than our initial lay-ins, and part of the reason why is we already have the outline. We've already got a lot here, and so we know we're going to this pen and ink stage next, and so it allows us to sort of get to the point a little bit more, maybe a little bit more clearly. This is rather dark on the page as opposed to before. So what I might do, because you've been able to see me do this now, which was sort of the point of using the harder material. But I might just step this down a little bit because I want the ink to define the drawing. I don't want this initial lay-in to get too dominant. So maybe this is a way, kind of a compromise between the lines going on in a way that you can see them more easily, and then also the ink drawing getting the contrast and the focus that it needs to have to be successful. Because we're not just drawing over this drawing again with the ink. We're sort of doing the next stage of development. So that's going to be the next stage. We're going to come in with ink. Take a quick break and we'll continue. It's time now to turn our attention to the movements of these forms. So I'm taking a minute just to review my other drawings. I want to make sure that we're keeping this in the spirit of those. So this is sort of like a plane. So I can maybe just start by defining the edge. When I say it's a plane, I'm talking about this. That's no way to start, is it? We are going to soldier on. This is dropping down. This is a corner. And as our instructors say, in particular, I'm thinking of Steve Houston, we want to find the corners of the form. It's very important for us. This is going to be the tough angle here to describe because it's at such a glancing angle. But it's probably going to be in shadow. So this might be a good opportunity for me to sort of map the form. So what I'm doing is I'm imagining a movement going across that surface. It's starting where we can't see it from behind, and then it's coming across the surface. Maybe that's as far as I need to show right now, because we can connect these lines to other lines, but I want to show that the surface is coming out from behind where we can't see it. If that's a little too abstract, or maybe that doesn't make sense to you, just wait. It's through you repeatedly seeing me do some of these movements that the stuff is going to start to stick. Sometimes I'll do this. I'll just start with something specific and give it my full focus, and then work my way out from there. There's not one way to do any drawing. What I'm really doing is I defined a corner here. Here I'm pushing this down. I'm showing that there's like this stepping away. I'm imagining the light coming from the left. So maybe there's even like a little bit of tone that's being created there. And I'm going to get more specific here in how I carve this out. So obviously what we have is loose. It's a suggestion. But what I want to do now is just get a little bit more specific. And there's this down plane. Maybe I can keep this a little closer so you can see. So it's a down plane that is sort of becoming visible. I'm going to put this into shadow, and maybe a simple way to show this would just be the series of lines, and then I show that it gets narrower. Just as before, we can weight the lines, we can build up these effects, but just to begin with, I'm starting slowly. So what happens here is this sort of dropping down. Like I said, it's like, I think of it like a road or like a little roller coaster. But there is this, like a track, a path that is oddly mechanical looking for the body. You don't have many instances where this really looks like, your sort of designy, art centery breakdown that are often done. If you know what I'm talking about, like that, turning everything into more of an architectural idea. It's not just art center, obviously. It's a lot of approaches are like that, but sometimes the body really does that. I want to show that this is starting to go under. It's starting to step away, push down into space. I can also show that there it is a sort of lifting idea. I was comparing this to the glabella, which, if that doesn't make sense to you yet, I mean, that's why you're here, so don't worry. We will get there. This is going to be receiving light the way I'm going to light the form. Just thinking about this ridge here, how I want to describe it. And one thing I notice is that the way this steps down, it's got a particular character to that. Maybe the way to show it would be, because it does have a roundness to it, as you can see. And maybe that's the sort of the direction of the line should do that, to sort of describe that it's stepping down, yes. Overall, the form is concave, but this section is convex. And we'll see that in the body as well, where there might be concavities that are created, but for the most part, the body is built up of convexity. So if you were to zoom in, on something that, let's say the nostril, right? That's a hole, right? That's the definition of concave. Well, if you actually look at it more closely, you'll realize that it's a series of positive forms that are creating that negative. And so there is this sort of ridge here that would be nice if we could indicate. And this is what I mean by sneaking up on the form. We know this is the lighter dilution. Anytime you have a form that is round, either convex or concave, you want to think of like circular movements. That's a good way to show it. It's such an interesting joining of different kinds of form. This part is coming down, and this is rounding around the surface. And so in this case, I'm going to allow the cross-hatching. It's just one way that these forms are sort of coming together, and I can carve that more carefully as we progress. I keep talking about this roundness. There's definitely a round feeling here. So I'm going to keep sort of the circular kind of idea, the circular kind of a pattern. I'm going to keep doing this. And the way I'm going to light this is all going to be falling into shadow. And so I'm going to have to decide which way the lines are going there. But I'm going to start with the lower hanging fruit, which means I keep using these idioms. What it means is I'm going to do the easy parts first, or the parts that I have a clearer idea. I don't want to jump right into the area that I don't quite understand how I'm going to draw it yet, because I'm going to get into trouble. I'm going to draw lines that are not the best way to describe these forms. So one way I can do this is, because there's obviously there was this stepping back over here. You'll have to excuse me. I've been experimenting with drawing materials, and I realize a lot of this is under my nails. But I'm going to go over this ridge, and then I'm going to continue the movement to show that there is a, as we noticed here, there's a tapering sort of convex area, this, and then we can even hook over the other side. This is the way I like to, this is a pattern that I like to get, because it communicates quite a bit. And in these areas where we're getting more light, maybe it fades away. It's almost like I'm just taking a bunch of notes for where the drawing is going to go. You can think of it like that. And slowly the drawing sort of reveals itself. This actually makes it's just going to make its way down here. I'm dealing with this. And this is, of course, the glenoid tubercle, which is going to be very important for us. Probably we're going to get a cast shadow moving over the form like this. Sometimes I'll do the cast shadows with a different rendering technique, a different type of line for myself to make the separation so I can clearly see its cast shadow. You don't have to do that. The lines could still follow the form more consistently and you can build up the value. But I find that that's helpful because it helps me remember where my cast shadows are. So what's funny is the top of the glenoid cavity is obscured in both the dorsal and the costal view because of the acromion, and then because of the coracoid. So it's like, if it wasn't for this other view to the side here, we wouldn't know what it looks like. So just like how these ridges and the bump on the contour were created, that's sort of happening in miniature in many other places. So anytime if you notice that there's something happening with the contour that's interesting, you want to look to see what is the reason for that. This is going to be like a little cast shadow. And then maybe that transitions into the rest of this form. And I know this is not, a pipe, or a bowl. We're getting into the actual anatomy, but I do want to like think of it that way. That conception, that idea is going to help me. It helps me with the rendering. It helps me with remembering it. It helps me in a lot of ways. We want to be careful, but we also don't want to overcomplicate the forms, which if you're dealing with a complex form is easy to do. So sometimes if it feels natural to just run the lines one way or another, sometimes you just want to go with your instincts on that because it's easy to get something that's confusing, and that's definitely not what we want. And I'm noticing here that this isn't just like a wall, right? It's actually sort of the peak of these two forms. Create a little bit of that. That might be getting too abstract or too geometric looking. My strategy for this is if I don't have a clear idea, I'll save it for a little bit later. And then the areas that I've saved, I have a different strategies on how to attack them because I've got areas that are surrounding, and then it becomes more of a transition. You'll see me using that technique repeatedly. And it serves me well. Like I don't have to solve every problem at once. So again, we're dealing with like a sort of a ramp-like form. And sometimes like a patch of lines has its own logic and it can overlap another patch of lines. But one thing that has to happen here is we have to show that the convexity of this like we're doing it as we come over this edge here. I haven't yet achieved the idea yet that that's positive. That begins to do it. So I want to move off of this roundness and then sort of fall into this trough. Maybe even like this. And I'm guessing this would be a cast shadow. Because this is going to be a shadow area, I can do some cross hatching. And so I'm creating an area which we're going to assume is going to be in shadow, but is not yet filled in, which is okay for now, because we've created quite a complicated little story here. I'm going to look for just sort of maybe a more elegant sort of solution to the problem. And it would be quite dark here, imagining where my light source is. So maybe just I'm going to take a risk. Just going to fill in some tones. That seemed to help. So if this is the positive, This is the positive form. And we're passing into shadow. So now this is sort of looking, I'm not sure this is wide enough, but we've sort of created this ridge that comes down. Now we haven't quite shown how it terminates yet. By that I mean this needs to get down and become this. Or appear to. And then perhaps there are, because look, there's this long axis here. So perhaps we can define some of that with long lines. Remember I said we want to connect our lines if possible? That's a perfect example of that. Say we've done that. And so, I mean, this kind of hatching technique, which is the hatching technique of the old masters, hopefully you're starting to get an idea that part of it is careful thought and observation of the subject matter, knowing what the form is. Part of it is design, having some design strategy, trying to make it look nice. So this is actually going down, so probably something like this. So the thinking that we are doing together, the way I'm talking, that is the best way to understand it. I'm going to just treat this cast shadow with a series of diagonals, which I know, but sometimes we just need to drop it in tone. That's sometimes the best way. So we've got these forms that are coming over, and then they're sort of dropping into a hollow. So these are not the primary forms here. These are, I mean, primary. If we're talking about the scapula, this is probably getting into our secondary forms here. And I really want to show that this corner, that we're not seeing like the actual edge of the form, but that it's turning. And there is some roughness here. Maybe I can use a little bit of that texture that I used on this other side. We're not seeing, this edge is not the last thing we see. There's an actual outline that is outside of that. So it's like we're seeing the side of a box. I know this is a small plane. That's the kind of form statements I'm talking about. This is interesting because the way I want to light it, this is going to be receiving quite a bit of light. Maybe I can just very carefully suggest this like leaf-like pattern. So we can kind of appreciate that. And down here, we're going to be getting a little bit of tone, just the way this thing sort of comes together. And this is like a roughened area. The same kind of ridge idea applies here. So we're turning away. The forms are turning away and moving into shadow, or at least just being pushed into tone. So that's not the border I'm drawing inside the border. So I can put some lines that are sort of pushing them back and then come over that and draw the outline proper, which is behind that. Now this is becoming very dominant, this line here. I'm not sure that's what I want. So I might need to strengthen more the rounding, getting from here down. Or I might need to strengthen these lines in here because that is becoming inadvertently dominant. So maybe just darkening these lines and specifically allowing them to cross that area. I can even give it a brother or a sister. So you realize it's just part of an overall movement of the plane. It's not this important edge that is too dominant. Maybe even with how these lines are coming over. Maybe there's an area where we're dropping in the tone a little more. A little too moist. Gotta be careful. You gotta go. That's why you gotta go slow. So it still is sort of hooking, but it does sort of do that. But I just it was getting too powerful. So I'm trying to neutralize that a little bit. So same thing here. We're having, I mean, on these sort of outcroppings, these bulges, it's the same thing. I don't want to just make this the outline. I want to be clear where there's a plane. And sometimes that's going to be tighter and sometimes it's going to be broader. That is part of making it believable, but that's also what it's really doing. Like here, I'm going to draw the outline first, and then I'll put the rendering on the inside. I mean, I'm loath to call this rendering because we're obviously keeping it relatively simple. This is not like a full tonal rendering, but we are describing light and shadow, and we are describing the form. So this is another one of these little ridges here. Maybe I just treat this like a positive form. So if my light's coming from here, maybe I can just treat this. So anytime it's like a positive round form, I'm sort of thinking of an egg. But I want to keep it secondary, so I got to be just really careful about how I do this. And then this is almost like a little pocket. And I mean, this is probably going to need to get darker given my scene here. So one way would be to continue these lines. It's too much. To continue these lines. And that is sort of taking away that area that I felt like I overemphasized. And then I'm imagining that this stuff is sort of falling into shadow. And since we've got some areas we can connect some lines, all the way down to where that is sort of starting. And maybe we have shadow a bit lower. Maybe it doesn't have to end so abruptly. I do want to get the sense that this is concave, right? Because this form is the concave side. This is where it's thin. And then it opens up. Like my instinct is to treat this more gesturally. I like that. But I need to show that it's this ramp that's then, I mean, what's gonna happen is like this is all the articulation. But what is going to happen is, I mean, this is going to be in shadow because the light's coming from here. So perhaps the best way of dealing with it is to block in that shadow first. And then as this turns towards it, this is going to start to, drop into tone as it moves up. I'm not sure that did it justice. It's an idea, you know. Think about the form I'm trying to describe. I come up with a plan on how I'm going to describe it. I try to execute that plan, and then I evaluate the results. That's the never-ending process. Okay, so here, I mean, it's impossible not to think of this as like sort of the boxy form because it's so boxy. How flat should I treat it under here? I'm looking at the real thing at the moment. Just to give me an idea, I've got quite a bit of reflected light from bouncing up from the paper, so I can sort of see into this. The way I laid it out, I'm sort of sharing that edge. Like there's not an equal distance between these. That might be too wet to work into, but this is the point where we're hitting the top of the. This is the point where we're hitting the top of the. Remember earlier when I was saying that I didn't make a mistake here and that's further back? This is what I'm talking about. That's the front point, and then this is the further back point that's higher. It does start to like have the overall effect of wow, every turn of playing, you know, like this person knows what they're doing, even though, as you know, and as I admitted, there was areas where like I didn't have a clear strategy or it didn't work. So, I mean, this is the illusion of drawing. When you see something that's done well, it looks as if everything is where it's supposed to be. But really, you've labored over it. And then there's this process where you are correcting and modifying and often redrawing. You know, this idea of tracing, designing with iterations, meaning more than one step, not doing it all at once. This is not just for this course. This is not just for, it's not just for the purposes of this class, this course that we were doing. Whoa. Well, yeah, that is capillary action. So there's so much moisture that it pulled the ink right off of my quill. This is where you got to be patient. We'll just wait till that dries. This is traditional drawing. That was my point. I almost want a line to like come up and then this way. I feel like if I move the lines this way, even though I want to keep this light, but if I move the lines this way, you kind of get the idea that it's like a road following away. I think this almost works against me, against us, I should say. We're in this together, whether you like it or not. Actually, I want to bring this a bit lower than this. And it feels late in the game for that. Let's let this dry. I can only get so dark and so dense with the ink. So this gives me a chance to darken the core or the areas of occlusion where there's not much reflected light getting in and shape that. And then the other thing is separation. So we're separating here. The idea is that if something's in front of something else, it can be useful with tone to separate those two objects. So that can happen here. I mean, I haven't pushed it as far as it can. It could happen from here to here. I think definitely we're going to want to do it from the coracoid to the glenoid and from this sole surface to the acromion. We're going to want to separate those out. And that's a very old technique. Another thing I noticed is I mentioned before that I thought this was getting too dominant. I can't get the light to work the way I'd like here to show you, but maybe if I do, if I rotate it, I might be able to show you what I have in mind for the lighting a little bit. It's the one disadvantage of this setup. Probably something like this, where the shadow is basically showing the down plane and the plane that is facing the right from this angle. So I don't want it to get too prominent here without also joining and connecting that. So that's a little bit of a modeling problem that is yet to be solved. So that modeling issue will be resolved, but that can probably also be done with the diluted ink. Okay, and if my light source is coming from the left, there's going to be some areas that are going to be especially dark just because of where the planes are facing. That could be in how I treat these core shadows here, but it could also be in how I weight that line. I'm going to do both. This was a bit of a smudge, a bit of an issue there. So this whole contour is going to get a little more of the dark ink. And as well, probably the shadow side of this plane. The shadow side of the plane is also going to get more darkness. So I got to be careful that the moisture from the edge that I just put down doesn't pull the moisture out of the nib. And this is nice, but it probably needs to be a little bit closer to the actual edge. But overall, I want the eye to see this whole side as darker. And we have also, I can maybe show this ridge. I'm talking about this. And this is going to be dark. So sometimes it's easier to work on the outward facing plane first and then put your contour line in. That's usually a little bit easier. And also with the pen, like I can strategize better than I have because now it's going to be hard to not get my hand in here, but it's fine. I wanted to start with those accents just to help me see. I'll try to be more descriptive than that. I know it can be a little bit unclear, especially if you're not a native English speaker, if I'm always speaking idiomatically, like where I'm going. But we can see we're starting to weight this side. Maybe we're not getting quite as much darkness there, for example. And this ridge is getting shadow. And because it's an up plane and there's no light source coming from above, because the light source that's coming from above in the left is not reaching this because it's in shadow. And because it's facing up, it's not facing another part of the scapula, which will, put light back into it. So as a result, this is going to be dark. See, it wants to pull the ink out. Also, sometimes, I can get a little piece of something, piece of the barrel shaving and causes issues. This point facing the light, so it's not going to be that dark. And I want this to lift. And I want to be more delicate here because, again, just like a light facing plane. You could arguably not even go over it with the dark ink. So here we are going to probably get a little darker. And this gives me an opportunity to sort of add a little more separation between the elements that are in shadow. And the other thing about the weighting of the line is anytime one form sort of begins and another ends, even if the overlaps are subtle, you can give it a little more darkness. Now I was just trying to illustrate that for you. Maybe that's a bit strong. And here, this is where this form becomes this. Like this is all one sort of growth. So here I can use that technique of just by giving a little shadow here. I mean, Michelangelo does this beautifully. I'm dropping this behind, even though I'm not really seeing that kind of shadow, or I wouldn't on the scapula necessarily. It's a drawing language thing. I mean, I could play that up a little more, or I could do it with the lighter ink. But it's an overlap. Do you see how they kind of made this more of a positive shape? I want to add a darker section here that focuses more on this corner, I guess. When you're drawing and talking at the same time, you find yourself saying strange things like I never say, I guess. But then what I want to do is then come up. I think that's a way to, because as you remember, I've been trying to figure out a way to explain all this. This is just one idea, trying to sort of make it more about this concave surface. And I'm playing with fire, obviously, because this is quite dark ink at this point. Remember, we want to connect lines when we can. That's starting to do more what I want. Starting to look more, a little bit more the way I need it to. And obviously, as the ink dries, it'll lighten, and hopefully, it won't be quite as dramatic of a difference there. And I'm drawing with the side of the quill to control how much ink is coming out. And I don't want it to seem like these are two different forms here because I know I've got a crossing happening. So what I might be able to do is just with a crosshatch here, sort of show that it's just a matter of value. It's not a matter of some weird complex form interaction happening. Of course, now that I have that, since I haven't done this with darks, this is getting disproportionately important. It's getting too much attention. So we should probably start to carve out. I love the coracoid process. But I don't need to separate this from this, and so it only makes sense that I can weight that. But it only makes sense that it's going to go dark there. You see it already, just that, already separated it rather nicely. Really, this whole form is sort of turning away from the light, so probably, like, I almost just went for it. But I want to take my time here. I almost did this with the dark, but I want to push this plane back because it's going away from the light. So let's make a core shadow. Might have to wait for that to dry a little bit before we realize what's needed for the rest. Because again, we're stepping away from this major plane here. Maybe this can be a bit darker to show that, okay, we're starting to move away from the light. And then we have to separate. This is definitely obviously the most, if you haven't noticed, this is definitely the most complex area. The one thing that's a little bit of an issue is I feel like this is just getting too much attention. We did move in the right direction there, and of course we can come back to it. I think the next thing I would like to do is to try to separate these forms. As we recall, it got confusing here which form was which. But even here, like we want to make sure it's really clear. Okay, this is like a finger, that's a thumb that's sticking out. And that's in front of the acromion behind. Yeah, I'm still not satisfied with the acromion that we have figured out the best way to show that twisting. I think if I thought about it more, maybe I should stop. But if I thought about it more, I might be able to. I'm sort of doing this. I might be able to come up with a better strategy. And the other thing I need to do is I want to separate these out from each other. I don't want the ink to pool once again. This needs to be darker because we need to see that it's in front. Is that the only way to separate something and show that one thing is in front of another thing? Well, no. It's not the only way. But it is effective. And when the forms are complex and we're not likely to, these aren't forms we're likely to know very well prior to this kind of study. It's going to pay off to be a little more clear. Okay, that obviously has to dry. It might look like a disaster. I actually think I think we're okay there. I think we've accomplished a lot of what we needed to do there. It definitely is separating. I think part of the reason it looks a bit strange right now is because we need to handle the outline. This is not the most obvious angle for what the acromion is doing, and so the less intuitive the angle, the position, the orientation, the more careful we have to be. Hit that pretty hard. I think part of the reason is, if you remember, we were going to do this sort of shadow. Drop it back a bit. I got to decide whether we want to absorb some of this or leave it. Even here, we can get a little darker in the planes that are facing down with our weighting. This cast shadow should be darker if we want it to survive this new round. Now, by doing this, I've sort of added like a new level of detail, and that might be a mistake because to keep it consistent, I then have to like enforce that. I don't necessarily want to put a shadow here, but what I can do is just make sure that the outlines here are darker, even though they're in the light, so that we have separation. And I can do the same thing here. can weight this and weight the shadow side here more so that there's separation without having to like put a shadow behind it. See, I'm starting to overall it's starting to do more what it needs to, which is to appear to be concave. I feel like this could just be pushed down a bit more. I'm letting my eyes lose focus. So this is not a tonal drawing, obviously. It's a linear drawing, but I'm still looking at the tones. You know, I'm using a linear technique to describe this drawing, but these values and these tones still matter, even if it's not what you would call a tonal drawing. So I still I use these techniques where I blur my eyes and look like I'm asking myself if it makes sense. Let me just illustrate the kind of the problem here. This is like this is like a hemisphere, and this it's like a thumb or a digit. And in actuality, this is actually passing above that. This is in front. So then we've got this sort of like this branch that's connecting, and this is also joining that, and this is concave, like this. So if you were like racing with race cars around the track, and then of course there's the other part here. So the question is, well, how do you render this? This is a combination of a concavity, this pillar coming up, that coming down. That's the trouble. So what I'm thinking now is that because the light source is coming from something like this, and that's why this side is dropping into shadow, and overall that's dropping into shadow. What might actually be happening is the core could actually be crossing this, and then that's why we have our core shadow here, and then this is all in tone. So I might need these values to cross there in order to make the illusion work. So that's what I'm going to try. It helped, I think. I do think that and I want to weight this line after all a little bit more, because just visually that's getting too much attention. Maybe even put more emphasis over here. the blade. I think that's consistent with the other drawings so far. This is round. This is definitely more of the concave version and the convex version. That's what we want. This is round. I can see the coracoid is sort of projecting like a thumb. The acromion is coming up. I haven't quite mastered that movement that we talked about here. It's something we can come back to. The elements are separating. When I look at it, I can more or less tell what's going on. Could make sense to darken this line, but I think for now I want to let the ink dry. And I would like to move on to our next view. So we're going to continue going through this, but at any time we can make adjustments. So this is not necessarily our final drawing. This is not necessarily our final drawing. Not only can we change and inform each view with one another, but as the rendering, maybe this rendering is a little tighter or a little more developed than here or here. We can sort of bring them up to more of a consistent level. But for now, I think it's important that we sort of move along. So I'm going to pause for a moment, pause my recording, and then when I come back, we are going to tackle this vague nonsense here. So yes, quick break.